When you see a polar bear, you know you're in the Arctic. I think they're such an inherent symbol of the North and living in brutally harsh conditions that the two go hand in hand.
Polar bears are incredibly important to people across the North and globally. In Churchill, Manitoba, they're economically important. There's a lot of wildlife viewing that happens here. And then they're also historically and culturally important to the indigenous peoples who have been here for millennia.
They are part of the region, a part of the community, and we need to make sure that they're protected. Naturally, the community has to be protected, and coexistence together means keeping both polar bears and people safe.
The Arctic is warming at up to 4 times the rate of the rest of the planet. This is causing tremendous impacts to the sea ice and the ecosystem that sea ice supports. Here in the Hudson Bay, historically, bears have come to shore in the summer as the sea ice melts. That time, however, is now a month longer than it used to be, and that continues to increase.
As Arctic sea ice habitat continues to decline, polar bears will be forced onto land in more places for longer periods of time. They'll come into communities more often, and that can be a dangerous situation for both people and polar bears.
Coexistence is that decision by a community, by a society, by a culture to live as part of the landscape around them and to live with the large predators that are in their backyard. That's really driving our efforts. We're trying to get ahead of what's setting up to be a perfect storm of less ice in the Arctic, more bears on shore, and increased human activity, all potentially leading to more conflict. And we're asking people to help us keep more polar bears in the Arctic forever. As part of that, we have a moral and ethical obligation to the people who live in the North to make sure that they and their families are also safe.
In Churchill, the community is very proud of the fact that we coexist with bears. You give this international exposure, or you try to continue to improve, and you lead the way, and hoping other communities can take advantage of that, build on what we're doing here across the North.
Polar Bears International has worked with communities in a couple of different ways. In Churchill, we were approached by the town to help them set up a Bear Smart working group led by local members, addressing challenges like waste management issues, increased education for visitors, and also issues like where polar bears are relocated when they've come into town and gotten into trouble.
The community noticed that there were some things that we can improve on. We had some discussions about the idea of forming a Polar Bear Smart working group, and Polar Bears International agreed that, hey, they wanted to be a part of it.
One of the first issues that was raised was what can we do about storing our trash more properly? We looked to our partners in the brown bear world to adapt their waste bins. Polar bears are a little bit stronger than brown bears, and so we had to work with manufacturers to beef up some of those bins to make them more polar bear proof. We're also working with the town on commercial bear proof bins and on changing the waste stream altogether. Options that are more economically sustainable for Churchill and better for bears. Alongside these developments, we started to look at applications of electric fences. And so here we set up a demo e-fence project around a dog yard with a local partner. We can use this to talk about the utility of these fences for other mushers and for other applications. We've also worked closely with the town of Churchill to improve electric fencing around their landfill.
Churchill has really been such a testing ground for human polar bear coexistence. They've taught us so many lessons about how to live with polar bears, what works and what doesn't work, and we can take a lot of what we've learned and apply that across the North to help other communities who will be dealing with more polar bears in the coming years.
At Polar Bears International, we're trying to look at the whole basket of tools that are available, recognizing that there's not a single path forward and that there are different solutions that might be more suitable for certain applications and certain communities. Those can include very low-tech, very affordable solutions like audible deterrents. And then on the high-tech side, we're looking to see what role some technologies might play, and that includes our work with radar. Historically, and around the Arctic, we rely on our eyes to detect polar bears coming into communities or camps, and that information is then relayed to professional polar bear guards and conservation officers to respond. But in the dark and in poor weather, bears can easily be missed. So we look to see if technology could play a role in filling that gap.
With our BearDAR project, it's really this early warning detection system to help give people time to prepare for a polar bear coming in and keep them safe and give that polar bear a better chance of, getting out of that community safely.
Our hope for the Beardar project is to have a tool that we can offer to communities and remote camps that'll help keep people and polar bears safe. We have a real-world deployment that we're working on at a remote weather station in the high Canadian Arctic, and we'll keep you informed as that goes. Another aspect of our coexistence work is to test some of the existing tools that are out there, and then also develop potential new tools.
Polar Bears International has been interested in looking at some of the deterrent systems that are being used across the Arctic. We've canvassed wildlife managers to find out the systems they're using, and we want to scientifically evaluate what kind of impacts there are at different ranges to understand that better and to do some serious testing using gelatin blocks. We also are doing cold weather testing because you've got temperatures maybe minus 25, maybe minus 40, and we have to know how these same projectiles perform and how they might impact bears at those temperatures. So we're concerned about animal safety and animal handling standards when it comes down to using these kind of systems, and we want to make sure that we're not injuring bears when we're trying to chase them away.
We've already done this with partners on bear spray, looking at does bear spray work in the cold? Does it work in windy conditions? Now we're applying that same frame to deterrent rounds. Some of the biggest challenges we see in working around coexistence are especially acute in communities that are new to polar bears or where polar bear visitation was less frequent. They often don't have the education, the tools, or the resources to safely respond or adequately respond to bears being around. And so one of the things we're trying to do is we're convening workshops and meetings around coexistence to make sure that information is shared and for people to see the different contexts that coexistence is happening in different parts of the Arctic. Last year, we held our first community exchange program in Churchill, Manitoba in Canada, and now continuing here in Svalbard. The idea behind the community exchange program was to bring key people together with experiences living with bears and working with bears in different contexts and different parts of the world, so they could share ideas, share concerns, and share solutions.
You know, meeting the good folks that we've met here has been educational, it's been rewarding. You develop a friendship, but also making sure that we're continuing to educate not only our communities, but also the world. People need to know the challenges of coexistence, but the benefits of coexistence to making sure that they continue to live on in harmony.
One thing we are trying to do through this process is to expand that toolbox. We know not all tools are appropriate in every location. They might not be available. They might not be legal. So the broader that toolbox is internationally, the more communities can kind of look in and select the tools that work best for them culturally and legally.
It's important that we try to standardize safety messaging across the Arctic to keep people and polar bears safe no matter where they're interacting. So some of the things that we're working on are things like coloring books for kids to help adults talk to children about how to stay safe with polar bears. We've also done a series of educational handouts and translated those into different languages. As well, we helped build a safety video series that's community specific for visitors and locals. Anytime we're developing educational content, it's so critical that really the content is coming from the community. So whether it's coloring books or handouts, we might start with a base, but we are not finalizing anything until we get community input, and we're tweaking as we go so that it really reflects what the community wants to see and what's useful for them.
So as someone who's worked in conflict for quite a long time now, it's always great to sit down with people from the north living and working with bears on a regular basis. What we're really trying to do through these programs is to tweak an already pretty good program and to really fill in the gaps around the edges and make sure that as conditions change on the ground, if we are seeing more bears spending longer time ashore with more access to human areas, that folks are prepared for that. One of the things that gives me hope in our broader conservation efforts are gatherings like this. It's that people care. People who live, work, and recreate in polar bear country, they don't want to have negative impacts on polar bear conservation. They want to do the right thing. And so just seeing them work together and puzzle through some of these things and trying to come up with a better way, a better tool, a better regulation, definitely gives me hope.